Why would Rome, the empire that measured power in miles of road and ranks of shields, send a single legion into Britain's fog-bound upper Rome? And how could that legion simply vanish? At dawn along a ridge nameless to Roman maps, breath steamed over Scuda, slick with frost. The Ninth Legion, proud of Spanish laurels and hardened by rain, advanced in silent segments. Scouts slipped ahead, baggage hugged the column. The Aquila winked through mist, then horns answered horns from the trees, and javelins hissed. The front checked, the rear crowded, and in a narrow choke, discipline met the arithmetic of ambush. This is our tactical problem and our historical wound. Why did a formation built for order stumble on ground that punished certainty? And what did that stumble force Rome to admit about power and limits? Britain wasn't only a far island on the accounts, it was a billboard of dominance at the empire's cloudy edge. Tin, lead, grain, slaves, and prestige justified the cost. If the legions held the north, lose a patrol and you report. Lose a legion and you rewrite strategy, reprioritize garrisons, and convert ambitions of conquest into a frontier of stone and patience. For Rome, failure reverberated. The Ninth's road to that moment began decades earlier. Julius Caesar marched an earlier Ninth through Gaul and twice to Britain in the 50s BCE, forging toughness into the unit's story. Men changed, the name endured. In 43 CE, Claudius invaded to stay. The Ninth, later styled Hispana after Spanish campaigns, garrisoned Lindum and then Iberacum, the fortress anchoring Rome's northern operations. In 60 or 61, during Boudica's uprising, their legate, Quintus Petilius Carialis, rushed to relieve Camulodunum. Tacitus records disaster. Cavalry escaped. Infantry were cut to pieces. The legion rebuilt, swallowed recruits, drilled hard, and returned to the line. After Cerialis' humiliation came discipline, stone, and revenge. The Ninth built and fought through the northern campaigns of the 70s, as Iberacum grew into a city of bathhouses, workshops, and a fortress of dress blocks. Agricola, relentless and methodical, pushed further north in the 80s, testing Rome's reach along Moran coast. Then the records thin. Around 108, an inscription at Iberacum shows the Ninth rebuilding in stone. After that, silence. By 122, the Sixth Victrix appears in York, and Hadrian orders a wall. Between those dates lies either a transfer, a disaster, or a quiet administrative burial. Of honor, we'll test the competing explanations. Did the Ninth die in Britain's north, pulled into a converging trap? Did it transfer quietly to the Rhine and fade thereafter? Or was the name retired, the survivors merged, and the embarrassment buried under titles and paybooks? In the Netherlands, tile stamps from Nijmegen have been read as traces of the Ninth, though dating and context remain disputed. In Britain, the absence after 108 is loud, but the real shock was the response. Almost at once, a fresh legion took York, and an emperor famed for calculation chose a wall over glory and limits. To grasp how a legion could be unmade, consider its march anatomy. In hostile woodland, the Roman column stretched like a living machine. Scouts and Germanic trackers ahead, flank screens in loose order, engineers and baggage bound centrally, infantry cohorts staggered for depth, cavalry to probe and punish. The doctrine favored speed into favorable ground. In broken terrain, that preference inverted. Compress too tightly, and missiles scythe a dense target. Extend too far, and the rear dies before the front can wheel. The emergency answer was a hedgehog, cohorts forming boxes around standards. But that demanded space the enemy denied that morning. Intelligence, not valor, decided survival in Britain. Auxiliaries from the region, archers from the east, Batavian swimmers, Thracian cavalry, and native scouts were eyes and ears. Without them, a legion moved blind. Weather multiplied risk. Sudden rain softened clay, moorland bogged carts, and streams turned to barriers. Roads and marching forts reduced chaos. But north of the line, the ground remained a negotiator that rarely signed Roman terms. Signal fires and trumpets carried orders, yet sound died in fog and trees swallowed flags. A severed patrol, a burned way station, a missing courier, these were tremors that foreshadowed a larger break in the frontier. Against this landscape, personalities mattered. Quintus Petilius Carialis, once bloodied by Boudica's ambush, learned humility the hard way, and later cracked the Brigantes with methodical force. Gnaeus Julius Agricola, relentless and precise, pushed farther than any governor dared, yet his success threatened an emperor jealous of outsized reputations. Hadrian, soldier scholar, preferred limits that lived to campaigns that bled forever. And within the ninth, a centurion's world narrowed to oaths, the gleam of the eagle, and the arithmetic of keeping 80 men coherent when fog erased horizons. His pride was steel, his doubt whispered whenever scouts returned late from hostile ridges. Consider what you would have done. You command the ninth at Iberacum. Rumors harden into reports. A confederation of northern tribes is testing forts, burning way stations, and shadowing patrols. Reinforcements are weeks away. If you sit behind the stone, you keep the legion intact, but villages loyal to Rome burn and prestige bleeds out across the province. If you march to punish, you restore fear and perhaps stop a wider revolt. Yet you must cross ground the enemy selects. Do you split your force, invite defeat in detail, or move as one fist and risk a decisive ambush on their terms? Archaeology gives us fragments and sometimes silence that thunders. At York, inscriptions attest to the ninth's pride and labor, stones naming cohorts that rebuilt gates and towers. Funerary slabs speak stiffly of service and origin. Men from Italy, Spain, Arlo, and the Danube made brothers under the wolf standard. Tablets from forts along the northern roads preserve requests for socks and strength reports that breathe the everyday. And then there is Nijmegen, where stamped tiles complicate the map. Are they proof of transfer or simply reused material? An Aquila lost would demand recovery. None recorded remains the riddle for historians. History leaves us a scar to probe before the final wound. The ninth's humiliation under Boudica taught caution and the price of urgency. It also showed that discipline isn't invulnerability. It's probability bent in your favor until the terrain and the enemy's intelligence overpower it. The question that haunts this frontier is simple. Did a legion repeat a known mistake, or was it sacrificed to decisions made far from the rain and the heather? Strategy flows downward. Paperwork can kill men. To understand how a unit so formidable could fail, we must understand the machine that made it formidable first. But the real shock was not only a disappearance, it was the admission that followed. Hadrian's Britain pivoted from advance to architecture, from chasing glory into hills to building a line that turned movement into negotiation. That choice suggests the empire learned a hard lesson it never put plainly on papyrus. Before we test the theories of fate, we'll dissect the legion itself. Cohorts, centurions, weapons, logistics, in the brutal discipline that forged cohesion. Master the machine, and the gaps in the story narrow. Fail to, and you're condemned to myth. Why did Rome decide that a wall was victory here? Why would an empire built on relentless offense invest so much in the art of stopping, digging, and waiting? And how did that paradox make Rome's legions unstoppable? In Britain, the Roman machine wasn't glory and marble. It was sweat and mud, a mathematics of cohorts, and a discipline that turned fear into formation. To understand the Ninth Legion's fate, we need to understand the system that shaped every step it took, every order it obeyed, and every risk it accepted. A legion was 10 cohorts, with the first double strength and proud of it. Each cohort held 6 centuries. Each century, roughly 80 men, lived in 8-man squads called contubernia. Over them stood a spine of experience. The primus pilus, first spear of the legion, the centurions with their vine staffs and scars, the camp prefect who remembered every road and ditch. A legate answered for everything, and his tribunes served as eyes, scribes, and when needed, political shields. Standards were their souls. The Aquila was more than plated silver. It was the oath-made metal. Lose it, and the legion lost itself. Around it clustered signifers in the imagines of the emperor, borne by the imaginifer. Horns carried orders when fog killed sight. In Britain, the horn could mean life in the span of a single breath. How did Rome turn recruits into this organism? Training was a campaign without end. Marches with full kit, hardened feet and will. Wooden swords, heavier than steel, drilled wrists until the shield edge became a weapon. Every man learned to dig, the ditch, the rampart, the gate. Punishment set the rhythm, docked pay, lashes, and in extremis, decimation. Rare, yes, but the story of decimation did the work of 100 beatings. The oath, the sacramentum, bound the man to the eagle as surely as iron rivets bound the cuirass. What gear one fights in Britain's weather and woods? The scutum turned javelins and hid fear. The pilum's soft shank bent on impact, ruining enemy shields and forcing choices. The gladius ruled it at close quarters, but in cavalry charges and extended fights, the longer spatha began to appear, a frontier innovation creeping into infantry hands over time. Armor varied. The famous segmented cuirass wasn't universal, and chainmail's flexibility often made more sense in rain and heather. Artillery, scorpions that spat bolts and ballistae that hurled stones, followed the legions like portable thunder. Engineering was strategy in slow motion. Each day on campaign ended with a camp, ditch, rampart, gates aligned by the compass, tents arranged by cohort and century. In Britain, clay sucked at boots in collapsed trenches. The solution was drainage, fascines, and more muscle. Roads were lifelines laid across bog and moor in corduroy layers of timber and stone. The Stanget Road, anchored by forts at Corbridge and Carlisle, prefigured a policy of lines and depth. You can read the doctrine in the surviving ditches and turf walls. Geometry as a weapon. Why did Rome lean so hard on auxiliaries in Britain? Because intelligence outruns heroism. Archers from the east thinned ambush lines before swords met shields. Balearic slingers cracked skulls at distances that humbled tribal javelins. The Batavi crossed rivers in full kit and surfaced behind enemy screens. Germanic cavalry probed, feigned, and punished. Local scouts, sometimes the sons of client chieftains, translated terrain into time. Without them, a legion's strength became a target, not a solution. With them, the machine saw around corners. Marching through hostile woodland demanded a different grammar of movement. The column opened with skirmishers and scouts, then alternate cohorts and baggage to avoid a single soft center. Cavalry rode the flanks in loose files, never straying so far that a horn couldn't recall them. At contact, doctrine prescribed either a rapid deployment into line or an all-round stance, the hedgehog, around standards and artillery. Both options required space, and space was exactly what an enemy chose to deny. The best answer was preventive. Don't be surprised, or be surprised on ground you already chose. Logistics finished what courage started. Grain moved from estates and ports to legionary granaries, then forward to auxiliary forts along wagon roads that had to survive rain, hooves, and sabotage. Vinegar cut the water. Salt preserved the meat. Oil and wine bribed fatigue. The Classis Britannica, the provincial fleet, kept coastal flows alive and pushed rivercraft inland along the Humber and Tyne. Bridges and fords were strategic choke points, defended by blockhouses and patrol schedules. When roads failed, mules didn't. When mules failed, men carried. Discipline wasn't cruelty for its own sake. It was the grammar that let men communicate under terror. A centurion's vine staff was a reminder and a contract. Do your part, and the formation will save you. Break, and you'll kill your brothers. The system created pride. Men competed in ditch-digging speed, in straightness of ramparts, in the shine of helmets. The legion became a family with rules that made battle survivable. In letters from Vindolanda, we glimpsed the underside. Requests for socks, complaints about cold, rosters of absences, humanity wrapped in armor. Why would a conquering state favor fixed lines in a country it hadn't finished conquering? Because frontiers aren't just about enemies, they're about tats. The Stanegate line of forts and patrols mapped an argument. Dominate movement rather than territory. Depth beats reach. Rome could chase raiders into hills forever. Or it could build a system that turned raids into tolls and warnings. A wall is a fortress stretched into time, a logistic instrument as much as a barrier. In Britain's north, that logic sharpened with every campaign that ended in mud instead of maps. Consider what you would have done. You're the camp prefect of the 9th on a late autumn march. Scouts report shadowing warbands at the limit of sight. No attack yet, but fires on the ridgelines. You've got 2 hours of daylight, a swollen stream to your front and baggage that can't turn fast. Do you push across and camp on the far bank, denying the enemy the initiative? Or do you halt short and entrench with the stream as a moat? Push, and you might beat a night assault with space to deploy. Halt, and you might invite encirclement by dawn. The Ninth's officers had lived the consequences of these choices. Cerealis, burned by Boudica's trap, learned that speed without screens is a gamble paid in blood. Agricola, a planner who could march hard and still build a perfect camp, proved that predictable discipline can feel like aggression when it never leaves the enemy a clean target. The men felt these doctrines in their bones. A veteran's pride came from knowing he could close his eyes and still find the place his contubernum would stand in the night camp. Order was comfort. Order was survival. Archaeology lets us audit the manual without the manual. At Vindolanda, writing tablets record everything from leave requests to strength returns, proof that paperwork was the empire's second sword. Shoes by the thousands prove tempo. You don't wear out that much leather without marching schedules that hurt. Ballista bolts and lead sling bullets clustered near fort gates speak to layered defense. Missile storms before melee. In York, inscriptions credit cohorts of the Ninth with rebuilding, a reminder that spadework and stone were as Roman as the charge. The machine left fossils of procedure. Even excellence had a blind spot. The cohort system assumed time to form, room to breathe, and intelligence arriving first. In Britain's hills, enemies attacked assumptions, not men. Unknown to them, a confederation might test forts, time response, and aim to sever a legion from its roads. The shock was Rome's answer when the machine met its limit. It didn't chase harder. It adapted, fortified, and reshaped Britain's strategy for good. What happens when pride becomes a wall, truly? For all to see. Why did Cerealis choose speed over security when every Roman manual warned that haste breeds ambush? And was there any choice at all once Camulodunum began to burn? The uprising that trapped him in that dilemma wasn't a sudden brushfire. It was a blaze fed by resentment and insult. Boudica's flogging, the rape of her daughters, and the veterans' arrogant exactions at the colony had stacked dry tinder across southeast Britain. When the governor, Suetonius Paulinus, marched west to smash the Druid stronghold on Mona, he stripped the heartland to fuel his offensive. The moment the legions looked away, the Iceni and the Trinovantes struck, and the temple to deified Claudius, seen by locals as a Roman yoke fixed in stone, became a siege beacon. Cerealis, legate of the Ninth, received the news as the colony's messages grew frantic. Veterans and their families were penned behind half-finished defenses, the surrounding settlements in flames. Every hour felt like a test of Rome's promise to protect its loyalists. For a legate whose career had been built in the furnace of civil war and frontier fights, inaction was a sentence, not a plan. He assembled what he could move fastest, a corps of legionary infantry and a cavalry screen, auxiliaries whose speed and shock could rip open a path. The numbers are lost to us, but Tacitus is unequivocal about the outcome. The infantry were cut down, the cavalry escaped, and the rescue failed. Boudica's coalition wasn't a rabble rushing to die on Roman blades. They used mobility, chariots, and knowledge of every track and marsh. Their goal wasn't to stand in a field and be measured. It was to make the Romans move where the Romans died. The ground around Camulodunum offered them choices. Low, wet approaches constrained Roman deployment. Woods masked movement. Streams created choke points that split a column into bite-sized segments. A relief force that favored speed would likely leave its heavy artillery and much of its baggage behind. That meant no stone throwers to clear timber lines and fewer tools to entrench quickly if the march stalled under fire. Cerealis' stakes were personal and institutional. Fail, and civilians tied to Rome by oath and settlement would be slaughtered. Succeed, and he would rescue not just lives, but imperial prestige. He had tasted humiliation before. He understood the stain a rout leaves on a legion's soul. The Ninth still carried the memory of an earlier disaster under his command. During Boudica's revolt, the pressure to redeem and the pressure to obey, the Roman instinct for decisive action aligned into a single, perilous directive: move. The column left its base in tight order. Roman doctrine demanded an advance guard of the scouts and skirmishers, flank screens to keep the main body from being wrapped, and a cadence that balanced speed with cohesion. Britain punished that balance. The more a column stretched to breathe, the more tempting the rear became. The more it compressed to survive javelins, the easier it was to trap. The Iceni and their allies harried the march, testing reactions, mapping the Roman answer to every feint. Chariot crews threw javelins and then darted away, their noise and dust bleeding the Romans of patience. Each mile grew more expensive in attention and energy. The ambush, when it sprang, exploited the Roman desire to reach the colony quickly. Picture a shallow valley or a constricting lane between wet ground and woodland, a route the relief had to take if it wanted to arrive before the defenders collapsed. The first signs were small: an empty village too neat, a sudden hush on the ridgeline. Then horns, the creak of chariot axles, and a storm of missiles into the flanks and rear. Auxiliary cavalry tried to punch out and turn the pressure into a fight on the enemy's hard terms. They found fences of men, hedged by marsh and brush, where speed died. Cerealis' infantry attempted the textbook answer: form a line, build a bar around standards, and buy time for the cavalry to clear flanks or for cohorts to wheel. But the space wasn't there. The cohorts couldn't fully deploy. The baggage, even if light, trapped movement. The front could neither advance into unknown terrain nor step back without crushing the rear. Command horns struggled against noise and panic. Centurions used their voices and vine staffs to force men into ranks that arrows and stones were tearing apart. In this chaos, personal courage mattered, but it could not erase systemic failure. The aquilifer, the eagle-bearer, anchored the center because losing the eagle meant losing identity. A primus pilus, perhaps a veteran of campaigns in Gaul or on the Rhine, fought to hold a hinge in the line where collapse would become encirclement. Signalmen tried to pass orders while dodging missiles. The enemy pressed at the corners, where Roman formations are weakest, and at the rear, where fear travels fastest. When a cohort standard dipped, panic rippled. Tacitus' spare verdict captures the shape of the outcome. The infantry were cut down, cavalry escaped. That means a deliberate decision at the top. Cerealis, gauging the mathematics of survival and the uselessness of throwing horsemen into a meat grinder, pulled the cavalry free and rode for safety. It wasn't cowardice, it was triage. With horse, he could still scout, cover retreats, and preserve a commander's ability to act tomorrow. Without them, he would share his infantry's fate and leave the province headless in the middle of a revolt. Why did the infantry die? The answer contains several lessons: relief operations, privileged speed, hope, and optics. If you arrive in time, you're a savior. If you arrive too late with a tired force, you're a meal. Cerealis sacrificed reconnaissance and heavy support to beat the clock. He accepted terrain he didn't control because to cede it felt like an insult to the colony and a betrayal of Rome's promise. The enemy exploited every Roman virtue. Discipline that kept cohorts together also kept them in the kill zone. Determination to press on became predictability. A desire to close for decisive combat became a march toward positional death. Consider what you would have done. With civilians besieged, your scouts warn that a large force shadows you. Your governor is days away on an island, and your legion's pride is already wounded from the last time haste met ambush. Do you halt, entrench, and signal for the colony to attempt a breakout towards you? Do you bypass the obvious road and bleed hours cutting through trackless country at the price of exhaustion? Or do you risk everything on one more mile of speed, hoping to catch the enemy in transition? Every option carries a body count. Which one do you own? The tactical anatomy of the disaster offers broader teaching. The Britons' chariots worked not because they were unstoppable shock weapons, but because they shaped space. They forced Romans to throw javelins early and in the wrong direction, to look sideways when the danger then came from behind. The marshy margins prevented full manipular agility. The Romans' greatest strength, unit cohesion, needed clean edges to function. Denied those edges, cohesion became congestion. In a clear field, the loose, noisy mass of a tribal army tends to break on Roman steel. In a channel, it becomes a net. Archaeology sharpens the textual outline. The burn layer at Colchester tells us the colony fell hard. Collapsed roofs turned to orange clay, smashed statues, charred grain in storerooms, coins fused by heat. The Temple of Claudius shows evidence of a last stand, its podium refashioned as a fortress within a fortress until fire did what swords couldn't. The same reddish-black horizon lines London and St. Albans. What we lack is a confirmed battlefield for Cerealis' defeat. A scatter of Roman military equipment here, a cluster of sling bullets there. None yet form the signature of a collapsed marching camp and a slaughtered infantry detachment. The absence fits the narrative. A rapid strike, a rout, and an enemy who didn't linger. Roman response to humiliation is another Roman strength. Suetonius Paulinus returned like a surgeon, gathering what forces he could, fragments of legions, loyal auxiliaries, and chose the ground for the decisive battle that ended the revolt. He arrayed his troops in a defile with woods behind, a narrow front that nullified chariot play, and open space ahead to make the Britons tire themselves running uphill into Pila and steel. The tactical intelligence that failed in the relief succeeded in the set piece. Britain learned that day what every opponent learned too late. When Rome chooses the field, Rome tends to win. Cerealis' story didn't end in disgrace. The empire needed men who learned from pain. He returned to prominence, later governing Britain under the Flavians and savaging the Brigantes with deliberate campaigns that paired fort building with punitive strikes. His caution after Boudica's trap became method. The Ninth recovered its ranks and its confidence, but memory persisted in the culture of the legion. A defeat like that isn't erased. It's integrated into doctrine. March screens grew thicker. Forced marches became less impulsive. Relief operations included, where possible, pre-positioned depots and rendezvous points that reduced the need to sprint blind. Strategically, the revolt's arc exposed the costs of a thin occupation and predatory administration. Nero's first reaction leaned toward punishment. Then fear of a protracted war and political pressure in Rome shifted policy toward moderation. A new procurator arrived. Taxes softened. Rebuilding proceeded. A governor with a lighter hand replaced Paulinus for a time. Politics wrote the next set of orders as surely as any general did. The lesson was blunt. The spear alone doesn't hold a province. The purse and the law must not incite the next fire. Modern commanders recognize the relief trap Cerealis faced. In urban sieges and insurgent ambushes from the Caucasus to the Hindu Kush, speed can be mercy or massacre. Intelligence, human, aerial, signals, buys the minutes needed to arrive strong. When the clock can't be beaten, the right answer is sometimes to make the enemy come to you on a ground you've already prepared, even if it means enduring headlines and heartbreak. Rome learned that in Britain before the age of satellites, with scouts, smoke, and the hard memory of burned towns. But the real shock was how long the memory of that defeat shaped decisions far from Camulodunum. Decades later, when imperial priorities tugged legions in different directions, the caution forged in those marshy lanes still whispered in governors' ears. Chase glory, and you might repeat Cerealis. Control the frontier, and you might spare a province another funeral pyre. That whisper helps explain why Britain eventually traded reach for depth, and why a legion's earlier disaster mattered to emperors who were never anywhere near those woods. What would you have done if you were Cerealis at the edge of that killing ground? The choice haunts every frontier officer who's ever been asked to rescue and punish at the same time. The Ninth's blood there became part of Rome's intellectual inheritance, as surely as any triumphal inscription. And as we follow the thread from those dead to the decisions of emperors, we confront a truth Romans seldom admitted openly. Sometimes strategy is written by failure. The knives that decide what comes next aren't only the ones in scabbards at the front. They're the ones behind curtains in palaces, where careers rise and fall on reports written in careful Latin about disasters no one wants to name. Why did signatures in Rome decide whether sentries on a wet rampart lived or died? And how did jealousies, favors, and quiet recalls shape the battlefield in Britain as surely as any spear? In an empire where legions could make emperors, politics wasn't background noise. It was the rhythm of marching orders, the reason a cohort stayed to garrison a lonely fort or vanished to bleed for glory on a far river. The Ninth Legion's story can't be told without the fingerprints of men who never saw a British fog, yet controlled it with ink. The Year of the Four Emperors taught that lesson with blood. In 69, legions across the provinces declared for one claimant after another. Otho, Vitellius, Vespasian, names rose and fell on the voices of soldiers. Britain's legions backed Vespasian, a former commander in the island's first conquest, whose rise confirmed a dangerous truth. Provinces were power reservoirs. Vespasian repaid loyalty with postings and promotions, but he also reshuffled commands to neutralize potential rivals. A governor in Britain could be a kingmaker by accident. That fear pushed Rome to cycle men through the province before success turned them into threats. Patronage ran through the army like a second chain of command. A legate owed his star to a patron. A tribune owed his post to another. If a legion had blotted its honor or embarrassed a favorite, reassignment might come dressed as opportunity. If a unit's reputation brightened a prince's myth, it might receive honors, titles, and better supplies. The Ninth, scarred by humiliation under Boudica and rebuilt in discipline and stone, lived inside that economy of favor and memory. Its future would be managed as much by careers as by maps. Nowhere are politics and war more entangled than in client-king policy, and nowhere did that policy matter more than among the Brigantes. Cartimandua, their queen, allied with Rome, delivered the rebel Caradicus to Claudius's men, and received favors that cemented her rule. Her consort Venutius nursed grievance and struck when Roman attention shifted. Rome's answer wasn't to annex the north overnight. It was to back Cartimandua, garrison roads, take hostages, and convert a tribal heartland into a guarded corridor. When that alliance collapsed, Rome had to fight a civil war inside an ethnicity, not just a conquest beyond a river. Consider the tactical calculus. Client kings provide low-cost control. Local elites police their own, collect tribute, and offer troops. Roman soldiers stay concentrated, ready to move. But the risk is structural. The moment a client's domestic politics sour, your projection of power collapses at the speed of rumor. Venutius didn't need to beat a legion. He only needed to make Rome choose between defending a queen and defending a line of forts. That choice sucked in detachments, created gaps, and turned a province's interior into contested space. Cost-saving strategy became debt with interest. Character made these choices human. Imagine Cartimandua, her legitimacy tied to Roman metal and Roman judges, watching her husband convert marital scandal into rebellion. Imagine Venutius, half envying and half hating the authority Rome had given his wife, deciding that killing Romans was less urgent than killing an arrangement. Somewhere between them stood a Roman prefect, sworn to protect a client and to keep the garrisons intact, knowing that every cohort he marched to her aid was a cohort stripped from a road that fed the frontier. He had to weigh a queen's survival against a fort's. Politics wrote the order book in subtler ways too. A governor who asked for reinforcements risked being labeled incompetent by rivals in the Senate. An emperor keen to advertise victories might urge aggressive patrols to feed a triumphal narrative. Procurators squeezed taxes to balance imperial budgets, then blamed unrest on barbarian perfidy rather than fiscal predation. Paper could kill men. A single letter reallocating grain from York to a Danubian depot meant a legionary ate cold, marched slower, and died tired. A pause on pay alienated auxiliaries who had joined for silver and status rather than Latin oaths. No career shows this more starkly than Agricola's. Tacitus paints his father-in-law as a commander who mastered Britain's tempo. Night marches, paired with fort networks. Measured cruelty, paired with roads and schools. At Mons Graupius, he smashed a northern coalition, then found himself recalled to Rome. Domitian, Tacitus suggests, rationed praise and limited support. A provincial governor who shone too brightly threatened imperial radiance. Agricola's success became a problem to be solved by under-resourcing and, in time, a polite exit. Even if Tacitus burnishes the story, the pattern is familiar. Metronome victories breed imperial envy. Starving a frontier of muscle has tactical fingerprints. Cohorts rotate thinner. Forts once held by legionaries devolve to auxiliary garrisons. Patrol reach shrinks. Relief times lengthen from hours to days. When the Ninth built in stone at Eboracum around 108, that inscription wasn't just masonry pride. It was a ledger entry in a province being asked to do more with less. Orders to punish raiders conflict with orders to conserve manpower. The doctrine that keeps columns safe, scouts, flankers, artillery and support, phrase when every detachment weakens the next fort in the chain. Assassinations and purges rarely explicitly target provincial soldiers, but the ripples reach the edge. A prefect removed for treason leaves a vacuum. A cautious replacement hesitates when decisiveness is needed. A cohort commander suspected of loyalty to a losing faction is parked in a quiet fort when he's most needed on the frontier. Emperors who distrust generals send safe men to hazardous provinces and heroic men to safe ones. The empire survives, but garrisons pay in blood for the theater. Trajan's reign amplified these tensions. His Dacian wars consumed manpower and material. Vexillationes, detachments, peeled away from legions everywhere to feed his bridges and sieges on the Danube. Britain contributed. The Ninth, like its neighbors, likely sent men east. Recruitment could refill numbers on paper, but experience couldn't be conjured by decree. A cohort seasoned in British mud isn't replaced by boys fresh from Gaul overnight. The result is a frontier that looks the same on a map and isn't the same in a fight. This is where strategy under stress becomes geometry. A line of forts across the Pennines or along the Steingate protects movement if each node can support its neighbor inside a day. Thin the nodes, and the distances stretch beyond a trumpet call, beyond a forced march. A clever enemy doesn't attack the strongest fort. He burns a granary 2 links away, then waits to strike the relief halfway, where neither garrison can help the other. If governors are juggling imperial demands, provincial budgets, and local politics, their margin for error disappears. A single misread report can expose an entire sector. The stones keep score. Building inscriptions in York credit the Ninth with works in the 100s. Altars and dedications celebrate the gods who guard walls and bridges. Then a new voice appears. 6 Victrix, a veteran legion from the German frontier, attested in York by 122. The silence about the Ninth after C-108 is an absence Rome never explains. Epigraphy rarely lies. It often simply doesn't speak. But when one set of unit names ceases and another begins at the same base, the conclusion writes itself in careful capitals. Someone left and someone took their place. Hadrian's philosophy turned those letters into policy. He was a soldier who loved inspection and logic. Where Trajan chased rivers and crowns, Hadrian counted budgets and borders. In Britain, he read the hybrid ledger of pride and risk and chose not to relive his predecessor's appetites. Build a wall, fix the flow of movement, turn raids into regulated crossings. Show strength not with a charge into hills, but with a line of stone, turf, and schedule that doesn't break when a governor dies or a cohort deserts for pay. Many called it caution. Hadrian called it permanence. Imagine him with reports spread out. Grain shortfalls from Iberacum. Scouts killed on the Steingate. A disputed inscription hinting that the Ninth had faded or moved. He had, on other frontiers, already learned that not all problems invite decisive battles. Some demand structures that make indecision safe. His order to bring 6 Victrix west and to draw a line from sea to sea in the north was the act of a professional who refused to gamble the empire's reputation on heroics. The wall wasn't confession, it was doctrine. Consider what you would have done. You're emperor in 122. Britain has flared more than once. Manpower is tight. Messages hint at a legionary name gone quiet. Do you drain the Rhine to punish northern Britons and retake every hill? Do you accept a frontier you can tax, patrol, and explain to auditors and keep the Rhine strong? Or do you split the difference, push briefly to a farther wall, then retreat when the ledger frowns? Each choice writes itself into stone and memory. Your enemies will study whichever you pick. So will your successors. The Ninth's paper afterlife adds a final twist. In the Netherlands, stamped tiles and an inscription at Nijmegen have been read as traces of East Hispana in the early 2nd century. If true, the Ninth didn't die in Britain. It transferred and was lost later, perhaps in a conflict now shadowed by silence. If false, or if those stamps record only a detachment or reused materials, the Ninth may have met its end in Britain, with its survivors redistributed and its name retired. Bureaucracy can kill a name as surely as battle kills men. Rome could disband a disgraced legion, fold its soldiers into others, and pretend the problem never existed. But the real shock was less about where the ninth died and more about what followed at once in Britain. 6. Victrix replaced a ghost and built a wall. The province's tone shifted from punitive expeditions to regulated crossings, from hunting warbands to taxing them. Honor was redefined. A centurion could now measure success by the straightness of a curtain wall and the drill of patrols rather than by raids deep into moorland, and to old soldiers that felt like retreat. To accountants and emperors with long horizons, it looked like survival. Politics also worked its edges in quieter hearts. Think of a Batavian auxiliary officer stationed at a northern fort. He'd married locally in practice, if not in law, had children who spoke both tongues, and cousins across the line among the tribes Rome labeled barbarian. A policy shift that tightened patrols and cut trade permits turned his household into a customs problem. A governor's decision about permits became a family drama about winter food. Loyalty wasn't only to Rome, it ran sideways, through kin and clan, along the same roads soldiers used. When politics hardened, soldiers had to harden with it or break. The economic engine under all this groaned and clanked with political screws. Procurators who squeezed for revenue raised tribute until it stung. Veterans settled on confiscated land behaved like conquerors because they were. In Boudica's time, that arrogance burst into revolt. Later procurators who learned the lesson eased taxes, offered legal recourse, and co-opted local elites with citizenship. Strategy wasn't just patrol cycles and fort placements. It was who got sued where and who believed the law could be trusted enough to cool blood. A cheap province is one that doesn't explode. These are lessons with modern echoes. A central government that starves a frontier while chasing prestige elsewhere invites a sharp test at the edge. A commander who glitters too brightly will find support tapered, then ordered home. Client rulers make for tidy maps until their marriages fail and their nephews choose the other flag. And names on stones don't just memorialize, they mark the tide line of policy. When one name fades and another blooms, you can often hear the debate in Rome without reading a single speech. Unknown to the men hauling baskets and measuring ditches on a wet northern day, the choices that determined whether they'd march or build had already been made far away. Unknown to the men arguing over wool prices in a vicus market, a report about a lost patrol would become a footnote in an imperial decision to fix a border for a century. That's the secret of Roman power. It runs downhill. And when politics upstream changes course, the valleys flood. But the decisions made in palaces show their cost in camps. To feel the weight of those signatures, you have to march in Caligay, curse a short ration, and watch a prefect decide whether to strip a gate to reinforce a patrol. You have to live beside the wall, that ambition built and caution perfected. You have to taste the ale watered by a procurator's economy and read the letter from a sister across the line who now needs a permit to visit. To understand why the ninth mattered and why its silence mattered more, you have to live a day in the world it shaped and was shaped by. And that day begins with bread, boots, and the thin line between soldier and civilian that politics smudged in Britain every single winter. Why did Rome fight with bread as fiercely as with blades? And how did daily life become a battlefield that decided who ruled the North? In Britain, the empire's grip depended on habits more than heroics, markets scheduled like marches, letters that moved faster than spears, and families tied to forts so tightly that rebellion risked starvation. If you want to understand the Ninth Legion's fate, follow the loaves, the boots, and the prayers. So at Iberacum, a centurion of the Ninth counted his men at dawn, then counted something else at dusk. Credit owed to the baker beyond the gate, and favors owed to the blacksmith whose son served as a scout. In the vicus outside the walls, a British trader haggled over wool and salt while his sister lit a little altar to a Roman god who had learned a local name. Nearby, a Batavian cavalryman worried about the child he could not legally claim until discharge, and a veteran measured the plot he expected after 25 years of service. Daily routine was doctrine turned domestic. Men woke to the watchword, broke bread from the oven block, and drank watered wine or sour vinegar that kept stomachs honest. Some drilled with weighted practice swords, some hauled timber for repairs, some served guard until their calves burned. Every evening the bedding was checked, the ditch was inspected, and the centurion's vine stick reminded the lazy that indiscipline in a camp becomes panic in a fight. Pride lived in order. A man could walk blind and still find his tent and his place on the rampart. Rome integrated with a rhythm as calculated as any march table. Baths promised clean skin and hot rooms where deals grew warm. Temples rose to Jupiter, to Mithras in caverns under the street, and to local deities given Latin titles so offerings could flow in both directions. The Forum at Iberacum offered magistrates and clerks to weigh disputes, a visible promise that violence would be priced. Markets ran on coin and credit, taxes on grain and hides. Roads did more than move legions. They delivered booty, salt, glass, wine, and expectations about time and law. For conquered communities, the balance sheet cut both ways. Tribute and labor for roads bit hard, and veterans settled on confiscated fields could behave like conquerors because they were. Hostages taken from leading families went south to learn Latin and loyalty under the eyes of officers. Yet trade thickened, raiders found fewer opportunities, and ambitious chiefs discovered the latter Rome offered: friendship, a Roman name, occasional command of auxiliary cohorts, and the right to sit among local councils as a man of two worlds. Security purchased compliance, and compliance purchased status. Soldiers lived between ration and reward. A legionary's pay arrived in coin, then bled outward in deductions for food, kit, and the occasional bribe to ease a duty. He owned his boots, his cloak, his tools, and his reputation. Letters show the texture. From Vindolanda, a friend asks for socks and sandals against the cold and begs for fine beer to make the watch tolerable. A birthday invitation from one officer's wife to another captures the warmth of friendships that ignored the law that banned marriage for soldiers. De facto families made the ban obsolete in practice. Citizens, non-citizens, slaves, and freed people moved through this web with unequal rights and shared routines. Legionaries were citizens by definition. Auxiliaries became citizens at discharge, and their children rose with them. Slaves cooked, cleaned, hauled, and sometimes traded on behalf of their masters. Freedmen ran taverns and workshops, signed contracts, and put their new names on altars. In cemeteries outside the walls, epitaphs mourned lost daughters and sons, noted years of service, listed origins from far provinces, and revealed a city where the dead spoke many tongues but shared stone. Integration had a tactical grammar. Garrison duty followed a schedule that tried to make surprise impossible. Patrols walked the same lanes at varied hours. Cavalry scouted ridges and river bends. Traders crossing the gates were questioned with courtesy that could turn sharp in a breath. Hostages visited the commander under pretext of hospitality that doubled as surveillance. Informers sold names when grain was short. The same networks that delivered gossip to the tavern delivered intelligence to the Principia. Soft control could smother embers, but it could also breed resentment that only fear kept from flame. Economy was strategy in slow motion. Coin arrived with pay chests and left in taxes and purchases, turning a tribal barter zone into a market tied to distant mints. Grain flowed from estates to granaries and back to tables, with shortages flagged in letters that read like weather reports. Shoemakers thrived because marching eats leather. Smiths repaired nails and rivets because empire chews iron. Women sold warm cloaks and hot stew on cold mornings outside the gate. A stable frontier was one where merchants knew the patrol schedule and the price of salt never spiked. Religion stitched identity to duty. Underground soldiers gathered in the tight chambers of Mithras to share meals that felt like initiation and endurance blended. Altars to Jupiter Optimus, Maximus stood in open light, while smaller stones invoked local spirits of river and spring with Roman spellings. Along the wall line, an unusual cult appears in the stones, the personified discipline of the army, a reminder that self-control was worship as well as rule. Faith helped men endure cold and boredom, and it reframed fear as loyalty not to self but to a standard. Law promised order and delivered theater. Petitions to the governor, contracts in Latin, and fines posted on tablets made justice visible. Yet punishment kept its teeth. In cemeteries near York, archaeologists have found many burials with severed heads placed at the feet, a rite that mixes execution, belief, and warning. Another cluster has been read as young men killed in organized violence, perhaps criminals, perhaps fighters from the arena. Whatever their story, the graves show a town where law coexisted with fear and where authority wrote its messages into bone. Consider what you would have done. You command the garrison on a winter day when grain runs late, tempers rise, and a fight in the market leaves a veteran bleeding and a local youth under arrest. Your officers urge a show of force. Merchants beg for leniency. You can triple the patrols, close the gate at dusk, seize hostages, and order lashings that will terrify and silence. Or you can remit fines, feed the poor from the granary, and offer work on the road crews. One choice buys quiet by fear. The other buys allegiance by bread. Unknown to you, a confederation to the north watches these habits as carefully as your quartermaster does. They learn market days, patrol routes, the gossip of taverns, the angle of the gate when the guard is bored. They know which tanner sells scraps to soldiers and cousins across the line. They do not need to storm walls to win the first round. They only need to turn the web. A delayed convoy becomes opportunity, a harsh sentence becomes a rallying story, and a burned farmstead becomes a flag. The frontier breathes, and your choices teach it how. Archaeology lets us hear the breath. Writing tablets complain about cold, request cloaks, list duty rosters, and note soldiers absent on special detail. One letter tallies shortages that stretch a garrison thin, another records a guest list that shows intimacy between officers and local elites. Piles of shoes measure miles marched, and the wear of roots, no map records. In York, inscriptions praise cohorts for gates and towers, a chorus of work. These fragments prove a truth sources whisper. Life was logistics, and logistics were fate. So what happens when the line fails? Why did a frontier that had marched north for generations suddenly freeze? And was a single lost legion the price of that pivot? Between an inscription at York around 108 and the arrival of Zechariah Victrix in 122, the Ninth Legion's name falls silent. Rumor thickens, policy hardens. This is the turning point, a chain of choices that ends with stone stretched from sea to sea, and with a legion, proud, rebuilt, and rooted in Iberacum, missing from the roles it once dominated. Unknown to the men counting rations at York, pressure mounted along the Stainget. Patrols vanished on routes they'd walked. Smoke lifted where farms had been quiet. A northern confederation, Brigantian shards, Caledonian allies, studied Roman habits and called Roman bluffs. Relief times stretched as detachments fed Trajan's wars. The governor's letters tried to reassure and still ask for aid. The arithmetic no longer worked. Three explanations compete to close the gap. First, annihilation in Britain between 117 and 119, a campaign that went wrong at speed. Second, transfer to the Rhine, Nijmegen's stamped tiles and a disputed inscription, followed by loss elsewhere under Hadrian. Third, administrative burial, heavy casualties, survivors folded into other legions, the name retired to silence embarrassment. Each has tempting fragments, and each has holes. If Britain was the grave, the sequence looks cruelly familiar. Forts are hit in a chain. Scouts report warbands melting backward toward broken ground. The legate faces the relief trap. Move fast to save allies and risk a kill box, or move slow and watch the province bleed. He chooses speed. The column sheds weight in artillery, plunges toward an outer fort already ash, and enters a corridor where bog presses one side and scrub the other. Tactical realities make the danger plain. Roman doctrine demands space to deploy into a triplex aces or to form all-round defenses while cavalry stings the flanks. Horse can't build momentum. Artillery can't traverse. Standards pin the center to honor even when movement would save lives. Enemies press at corners and rear, where geometry is weakest. Consider what you would have done. Your scouts are tired, your maps are guesses, and a burned mile castle lies ahead. Do you fort up short of the choke and dare the enemy to try you on prepared turf, knowing allies beyond may die? Do you push a small, fast detachment to seize the far slope, risking defeat in detail? Or do you reverse, accept shame, and live to fight tomorrow? Choose wrong and a name older than you dies in your hands. Teutoburg offers the comparison Romans feared. Varus marched deep through forest with his columns segmented by ravines. Britain's danger sat closer, with roads and forts inside a day's march. On paper. The difference was thin garrisons and the speed of enemy concentration. The similarity was fatal: stretched columns, broken intelligence, and weather that turned doctrine into aspiration. Lessons carved in memory are hardest to apply when honor, civilians, and tempo crowd the table. If the Ninth instead left Britain, the trail runs to the Rhine. At Nijmegen, stamped tiles and a debated inscription have been read as signs of IX Hispana in the early 2nd century. Tiles travel, stamps are reused, detached subunits leave traces that look like a whole, yet the scenario is plausible. Trajan and Hadrian shuffled units to meet crises, and a legion shadowed by old humiliation could be reassigned while Victrix took its fortress and its role. And if the Ninth was disbanded, the wound is political. Rome could hide failure in paperwork. A legion shattered beyond quick repair could be merged into others, its officers pensioned, its standards retired. The price is memory. Veterans who'd sworn to the eagle of I would end their days under another number, telling stories that no longer matched their payslips. For an emperor who preferred walls to epics, neatness had appeal. Archaeology weighs these possibilities with stubbornly partial answers. York's inscription fixes the Ninth around 108. 6. Victrix appears firmly by 122, carving its name into stones and altars. No mass grave, no debris field, no recovered aquila has announced a slaughter in the north. Absence isn't proof, it's pressure. Romans documented what they wanted to celebrate. The rest left whispers. Personal stakes sharpen the abstract. Picture the Primus Pilus of May, a survivor of Boudica's nightmare, arguing for caution in a council he doesn't control. Picture an aquilifer who slept with the eagle for a decade, about to take it into fog again, promising men that standards don't die. Picture a governor weighing a career against lives he hasn't seen, knowing that asking for another legion is a confession Rome punishes. Unknown to the men binding their feet, the enemy planned erosion, not collision. Raids to create shortages, ambushes to eat patrols, fires to draw out reliefs, attacks on signal towers when clouds sat low, pressure on clients to switch sides and make roads dangerous without loosing a shaft. A legion winning every small fight could still lose its margin. A legion that lost one big fight would lose its name. Hadrian's entrance is the hinge. He'd served on frontiers. He understood appetites and limits. He valued structures that made average officers succeed more than plans that required brilliance. In Britain, he saw a province expensive in coin and lives without prospect of decisive gain. Whether the Ninth had died or merely disappeared from the rolls, the message was the same. Don't wager stability on a single column's luck. Install VI Victrix at York. Build a wall. Train the frontier to behave. This is the turn. Improvisation hardened into policy. Before, Rome leaned on roads and forts to project. After, it leaned on a continuous barrier backed by depth and schedule. Before, a governor could dream of annexing the highlands. After, he dreamed of smooth customs at gates, patrols that returned on time, and raids that ended with fines, not funerals. The Ninth's fate, death, transfer, or erasure, made consolidation urgent and explainable. A wall can be a memorial if you read it that way. Consider what you do as emperor. Reports arrive. A legion's name has gone quiet. The Stanget blinks uncertainty. The Rhine can spare one legion if you accept risk there. Do you strike north to avenge and finish conquest? Do you send the 6th, set it in the Ninth's bed, and buy time with stone? Or do you gamble on clients and coin, hoping weather breaks your way? You can't do everything everywhere. What do you make permanent? The disappearance also changed lives that weren't consulted. A British auxiliary with cousins beyond the line now needed passes and escorts to visit home. A centurion who once measured success in punitive miles now measured it in the straightness of a ditch and the accuracy of a watch rota. Identity shifted from campaigners to custodians. Some felt relief, others humiliation. There's an ethical residue to the turn. If the ninth died in Britain, Mami, its last hours were confusion and mud, not a heroic square on a clean hill. If it didn't, its men watched their name vanish anyway. Memories folded into silence because silence was tidy. Either way, the wall that rose afterward captured their absence in its length. The empire didn't write their story. Modern parallels make the logic plain. States faced with mountainous insurgencies choose between chase and cordon. Some double down on mobility, others build barriers, sensors, and routines that make commerce flow in ambushes rare. The choice isn't about courage, it's about what you can sustain for decades. Hadrian thought in decades. He taught Britain to think the same way. But the real shock was the scale of the pivot. Rome, whose pride was lines of march, built a line of stone and admitted that the North couldn't be owned cheaply. The disappearance of the ninth isn't just a puzzle, it's the mechanism that pushed an emperor's hand onto a ruler and a chisel. In that sense, the legion that vanished didn't disappear. It reappeared as policy that outlived it. What followed was Britain restructured, garrisons redeployed, civilian life rearranged around gates and permits. Whether the ninth's bones lie under a northern bog or in eastern dust, its shadow lies across every mile castle. Sixth Victrix stamped its name where Enoin once had. Why would the world's most aggressive army choose to win by standing still? And how did that choice outlast the men who made it? The disappearance of the ninth, whether in mud or in paperwork, triggered a reckoning. Britain pivoted from pursuit to control. In the short term, that meant fewer lightning raids and more schedules. Fewer speeches about conquest, more inventories of stone, lime, and grain. In the long term, it changed how Rome measured victory. Not by borders pushed north, but by fewer funerals, steadier taxes, and a frontier that produced predictably instead of bleeding glory into peat. Forever. The immediate aftermath is clear in the stones. Sig Victrix took the fortress at Eboracum, re-garrisoned the north, and began to repair or replace what faltered. Roads were scraped, drained, and resurfaced. Fort granaries gained buttresses against damp. Punitive sweeps happened, but they were restrained instruments, not crusades. In 122, Hadrian visited and issued the defining order. Construct a continuous barrier from sea to sea, backed by forts, mile castles, turrets, and a road for response. The province's map changed from arrows to rectangles. Authority became measurable in cubits of masonry and days of march, not in speeches or imperial slogans. On the ground, lives bent to the new geometry. A centurion of 6 Victrix, inheriting the ninth's barracks, now judged success by straight ditches, tight rosters, and patrols that returned on time. A Batavian auxiliary with cousins beyond the line learned the price of movement, permits, escorts, and suspicion. A York merchant discovered walls create markets as surely as they stop raids. Soldiers with steady pay buy steady goods. South of the line, towns swelled. North of it, alliances hardened and raids shifted from pride to livelihood. Containment wasn't peace, but it traded spectacle for routine. Some called it defeat. The wall worked because it fused static strength with motion. Mile castles and turrets forced crossings into narrow gates. Patrol roads let cohorts concentrate where alarms lit. Instead of chasing raiders across bog and heather, Rome converted movement into paperwork, tax, and time. A wall is a filter. It bleeds an attacker's momentum, reveals his intentions, and buys minutes that make average officers effective. Behind it, mobile detachments, cavalry, light infantry, and scouts played the role of fists fired from a shield. The cost was obvious. Reach shrank. The benefit was decisive. Depth thickened. Signals traveled faster. Panics lasted shorter. On bleak days. Archaeology proves the pivot. Building inscriptions name units. Augusta 6, Victrix, Wexty, Valeria Victrix assigned to lengths of wall, bridges, and gates. Quarries and lime kilns scar the landscape where thousands labored. Fort granaries with heavy buttresses speak of planned surplus. Causeways and culverts show drainage solved in engineering, not prayer. Coin hoards cluster south of the wall along market towns. Tablets and altars record gods of discipline, river spirits rebadged in Latin, and commanders proud of curtain lengths measured in milestones laid. The Rudge Cup and its cousins even list wall forts like a souvenir of policy cast in bronze. Yet Rome couldn't ignore ambition entirely. Under Antoninus Pius, governors pushed north to the Fourth Clyde Line and built the Antonine Wall, a turf rampart on stone foundations with forts in advance and behind. For a time, it promised glory returned. Logistics vetoed the dream. The ground was harder to supply, the distances unforgiving, and local resistance elastic. After 2 decades, the army fell back to Hadrian's line. The message was unmissable. Even at peak strength, the empire preferred a predictable frontier to a beautiful one. The thermostat clicked back to the setting that paid. Commanders learned humility. Budgets enforced limits. This doctrine radiated outward. Hadrian's fixed lines with depth became the empire's operating system, from the Rhine to the Euphrates, barriers shaping traffic, forts in mutual support, mobile detachments as problem solvers. Later centuries refined the lesson with larger reserves, but the template lived here. It influenced successors far beyond Rome. Byzantium managed long borders with layered defense and fortified nodes. Even states with different cultures recognized the logic. Secure corridors, tax points, predictable law, and selective violence. The wall in Brittany wasn't isolationism. It was a strategy for converting geography into governance, risk into routine. Security could be planned daily. South of the barrier, Romanization deepened. Villas multiplied, municipal councils matured, and citizens counted safety as normal. North of it, negotiated power survived. Some groups traded through gates and prospered. Others raided and were fined or hunted. The frontier evolved into a single ecosystem. Garrisons bought grain and beer, smithies sold nails, herders grazed near watchtowers on leases set by officers. Inscriptions honor local deities alongside Jupiter. Names blend. Passes and tolls documented movement. The very act of crossing taught law. Archaeologists call it a frontier economy. Soldiers and traders simply called it life. And mistakes cost blood and coin. The lessons endure. Don't chase decisive battle on ground chosen by your enemy. Create systems that distribute risk, expose intent, and make average decisions yield steady advantages. Intelligence outperforms bravado. Logistics outlasts rage. In Britain, Rome learned to value indicators, grain prices near forts, the pace of messenger traffic, the quality of hostages arriving for renewal. When those flickered, patrol doctrines changed. Today, the same logic governs border security and expeditionary campaigns. Build sensors and gateways, fund mobile responders, and avoid terrain that eats formations. The expensive choice is usually the unplanned chase. Cheap victories fade by morning. Endurance persuades. Consider what you would have done as governor after the wall's first winter. Your scouts report calmer markets, but an uptick in petty raids. The treasury warns of shortfalls. The Rhine hints at trouble that could siphon a cohort. Do you pull patrols forward to stage punitive exhibitions in the hills, reminding enemies of reach? Do you shore up mile castles, train auxiliaries as rapid response teams, and accept that news of your caution won't fill speeches in Rome? Strategy is choosing the praise you can live without. In Britain, the wise chose boredom over triumphs that ended in fires and funerals everywhere. But the real shock was philosophical. Rome, the predator that devoured kingdoms, admitted a limit in Britain and turned it into strength. A wall isn't surrender, it's a statement. You'll meet us here on terms we choose under schedules we can sustain. Every gate became a negotiation, every patrol a signal of state capacity. The empire that mastered marching learned to master waiting, and discovered waiting could be lethal to its enemies' hopes. Few empires managed that pivot without breaking. Britain shows that Rome did, and that the price of refusing the lesson would have been paid in legions and provinces lost. In the end, the Ninth's silence became policy in stone. Whether its last march ended in a northern ambush, a Rhine transfer, or a bureaucrat's tidy disbandment, Britain changed course because loss or risk forced clarity. The wall and the economy around it shaped centuries, trained governors to prefer systems to stunts, and taught soldiers to measure courage in routine. Archaeology continues to surface proof, new tablets, dedications, and maps on bronze that echo decisions made in Rhine. The riddle remains. If a single new inscription named the Ninth's last field, would it change the lesson or only the epitaph forever? Why does the fate of a single legion still dictate how we think about strategy? And what does a vanished standard teach modern commanders about winning without chasing? The Ninth Legion's silence forced Rome to ask a ruthless question. Do you measure victory in miles gained or in risks removed? In Britain, the answer rewrote the map. Expansion yielded to containment. Triumphal speeches yielded to ledgers and patrol schedules. A legion disappeared, and an empire learned to endure. Across this story, the themes lock together like courses of stone. The Roman military machine, precise and brutal, thrived when it chose ground and imposed rhythm. In the relief of Camulodunum, speed without screens became a trap, and courage died inside congestion. Politics in Rome redirected tactics in Britain. Agricola's ambition met Domitian's jealousy. Trajan's appetites drained garrisons. Hadrian's discipline traded raids for regulation. Daily life carried the weight. Boots, bread, and letters from Vici defined the frontier's heartbeat. Then the turning point. The Ninth fell silent. 6, Victrix took its place, and Hadrian's wall turned wild space into negotiated passage. Consequences followed for centuries. What should we learn? First, choose the battlefield. The triplex aces is a promise, not a magic spell. It needs space and scouts. Second, intelligence outruns heroism. Auxiliaries, informants, and signal systems make ambushes rare and reliefs feasible. Third, depth beats reach in hostile to terrain. Mile castles, turrets, and patrol roads distribute risk in by minutes that transform average officers into winners. Fourth, logistics is law. Grain, boots, and drainage decide whether a frontier reacts on time. Finally, power is administrative as much as kinetic. Courts and taxes either cool the province or heat it to revolt. Strategy is the art of making ordinary days lethal to your enemy's plans. Consider what you would have done as emperor with Britain on your desk and the Rhine and Danube at your back. Do you swing the hammer and chase another Graupius into the hills? Or build a shield edged with mobile fists, static strength backed by rapid detachments, to turn raids into paperwork and fines? Rome chose the shield, and the men on the wall turned patience into a weapon. There are modern echoes everywhere, borders managed by sensors and gates, counterinsurgency that values secure corridors over theatrical raids, budgets that punish fantasy, and reward systems that can be sustained for decades. Winning by standing still isn't passivity, it's timing and discipline. Yet we close with uncertainties that keep historians honest. Did the Ninth die in Britain, its last eagle lowered into peat no shovel has yet cut? Do the tiles at Nijmegen mark a transfer in a later loss, or only a detachment that left oversized footprints? Was the Legion quietly disbanded, its veterans salted into other units, while the name retired to spare pride? We lack a battlefield layered with pila heads and bones. We lack a carved stone that says, "Here IX Hispana ended." Roman silence speaks, but it doesn't confess. One inscription could redraw the story in a single afternoon. Archaeology is the slow answer. Tablets pulled from damp soil revive voices that complain about socks and praise discipline. Building inscriptions fix units in place and time. Altars to local gods reveal how identity braided across the line. New digs along Hadrian's wall and across the Rhine frontier will keep cutting through rumor toward reckoning. The lesson isn't to worship certainties, it's to build arguments, like Romans built forts, with drainage, with layers, with allowance for weather you can't control. So what endures? The knowledge that restraint can be strategy, that walls can project power as surely as marches, and that the most feared army of its age learned to prefer systems over stunts. The Ninth Legion's shadow falls across every mile of Hadrian's wall because absence has consequences. Its men are gone, their dilemma remains. When ground punishes pursuit and politics thins the line, you either change doctrine or pay in legions. Rome changed, and Britain kept the receipt in stone. Consider where you stand, on the wall, counting minutes. In the book, weighing reputation at a desk in Rome, balancing ledgers with lives. The ninth is gone, but the question it asked endures wherever frontiers meet ambition and fear.